All right. Thanks everyone for joining. Just remember what I said, as we go through this fantastic evening with this IT free webinar training. If you have any questions, feel free to unmute your mic. Typically, as contestants or rather students come in, you're going to have your mic unmuted. But if you have questions, you can feel free to raise your hand and then unmute, or you can just unmute. You can also use the chat within your Zoom session to ask any questions you might have during the training as well. So we're going to kick off very shortly right now. And one of the very first things I'm going to show you as we kick off this is our background over here. And if you don't mind, if anyone or two people can share within the chat that they can hear me, that way I know for sure everyone can hear me. My microphone is on, but just as a double confirmation, if you can just confirm with me over the chat, that would be very great. All right. Thank you very much there, Akin, for confirming that. Appreciate that's good. Thank you very much. Okay, so right now, we're going to kick off by first introducing what is the cloud, what is Azure Cloud, and then we're going to go into some of the key concepts and architecture of the cloud, specifically with Azure. And then we'll jump into some very interesting practical, hands-on and theoretical approach into the Azure Cloud. Now, what you're looking at is the new ScarStack's website, where we have a full detailed information about the Azure Cloud career. As you can see, with the training from ScarStack, you get to leverage certifications both as an Azure Administrator Associate and a DevOps Engineer Expert. The reason is because while this career field here and this training is for the Azure Cloud, it does cover the key areas of DevOps, especially when it comes to what we call CI/CD pipelines. CI/CD stands for continuous integration and continuous development or deployment or delivery. That is a very critical and integral part of deploying your applications to the cloud. Another key part of this is the actual tools and technologies that are used for this DevOps while we are working within the cloud environment. This includes Git version control. It involves GitHub, GitHub Actions, Azure DevOps Services, Azure Pipelines, as well as Docker, Kubernetes, and a host of all other DevOps tools. And so by gaining your career as an Azure cloud career, especially with ScarStack solution here, you get to not only qualify for taking your Azure Administrator Associate certification, but also a DevOps Engineer certification should you want to. We also offer full exam prep practice test for you to be able to pass your Azure Administrator Associate certification during the course of your training or right after your training. This means you get to leverage tools that can enable you test yourself to get ready for your certification. And all of these are given to you for free. A few other key details about the Azure Cloud Solution Architect training that we offer is that when you enroll for our Azure training, you get to have, number one, a payment plan that makes you comfortably join this training and have less payment barrier from your perspective. And then as the training is almost getting close to completion, we offer things like resume build services. This means we'll help you build your resume to the level of professionalism that would make recruiters recognize you. Other things we do, especially at the last week of your training, is that we offer what we call mock interview preparations. This means that after what we've trained you with, we'll come to test you one-on-one with theoretical and practical session interviews so that you will know exactly what it feels and looks like once you start interviewing with your real recruiters. We also help you with setting up the environment for recruiters to reach out to you by letting you know the specific websites that recruiters look for cloud engineers the most, and also set up different job portal profiles for you so that recruiters can directly reach you and you don't all the time have to be the ones reaching out to recruiters. Through the course of this IT training, typically the full IT training, you would have what we call weekly practical hands-on labs. This means you would have practical assignments that you work on at the end of every week to prove yourself and learn practically from what is being taught within each week of your full IT training. Now, typically the full IT training for the Azure Cloud Architect is 11 weeks. There is an additional 1 week where we cover reviewing your new resume to you, and we also perform the mock and interview prep, as well as helping you set up your career job portal sites for recruiters to easily reach out to you. Very, very fun experience. At the end of each single class of the full IT training, we have what we call theoretical quiz, where students can come together, answer simple questions from the 2-hour classes for each sessions, and they get points for even answering fast. So this means this is an interactive quiz environment where you and other students would look at questions, have some few seconds to answer them. And it's not just about who answers the answer correctly or the question correctly, but who is able to answer it fast to get more points. So it's very fun, interactive, and there's a lot of practical hands-on. So this means this is a full practical hands-on training where you're supposed to come out at the end of the training as a person that has the experience of about 3 to 5 years. And so that's what makes it totally fun. And so you can see over here, if I were to click on this link over here, it's going to take me to what the Azure Administrator Associate from Microsoft looks like. And as you can see over here, you'd see that for this training, these are going to be the key areas that we're going to cover for your learning experience. Will make you highly proficient in virtual networks, storage, compute, identity, security, and governance. In addition to all of that, we would also give you solid, strong foundational learning experience on operating systems, networking, servers, and virtualization. Finally, our full IT training in the Azure Cloud Architect also covers deep and extensive usage and experience with PowerShell, Azure CLI, Azure Portal, what we call Azure Resource Manager templates, which is part of a larger structure for infrastructure as a code. This simply means you'll be able to automate the deployment of some of the applications or some of the services that you will be learning throughout our training. And you're also going to see a little bit of example of some of this concept once we get into the practical hands-on part of this free webinar training. Finally, as well, too, would ensure that you have a very strong professional experience of Microsoft Entra ID. Microsoft Entra ID is part of the security mechanisms of the Azure cloud that ensures that users within the cloud in an organization have the right credentials or roles to perform certain duties within the cloud, which means you can use this technology to control what users can see and cannot see, what they can see, but what they can do with what they are seeing, as well as those who can use this sort of technology to grant roles to other people and control what they can do. And so generally within the Azure Administrator Associate certification, the skills that you're going to be gaining through our IT training, which also then reflects into the certification, are things like being able to manage Azure identities and governance. When you see that word identities, it is structurally talking about Microsoft Entra ID, where we use a technology called role-based access control to manage people's role. And that role-based access control is shortened for RBAC, which is RBAC. You'll also now be able to learn how to implement and manage storage. And the storage simply means being able to manage how you store things in the cloud, just as you manage how you store things physically on your computer. However, in a more professional manner, you'll be able to see how you can store cloud resources within the cloud in Azure. Now, when you see the word storage there, what it is pointing to is this area here called storage. The next would cover the deploy and manage Azure compute resources within the full IT training. You're also going to see a little bit of that happening within this our free webinar training. This means setting cloud resources in Azure that are geared towards the box of what we call compute would be experienced, and you would have a professional learning idea of that. When you see the word compute there, it is looking at compute over here. Now, let me even give you a more deeper insight. When we go to a particular part here that we call the Microsoft Azure portal, this is the portal environment for the Microsoft Azure cloud, where you will be operating on most of your cloud resources when it comes to Microsoft Azure cloud. In here, we are seeing what we call the home page environment. Within this home page environment, we have something we call our Azure Cloud Services and our Azure Cloud Resources. The Azure Cloud Services are what we use in creating cloud resources. So, for example, if I wanted to create a database in the cloud, I would need a cloud service in order to create that database. When that database is created, that database now turns or transforms into a cloud resource. And so we see those two dynamics happening, the cloud service and the cloud resource. To create a database, for example, I would have to pick up the service that creates the database. When I provision or put together all of the configuration for that service, it then creates a database resource for me. Hence why we have the concept of a cloud service and then it's creating a cloud resource. So two very, very important concepts. And so we were just talking about compute a few seconds ago. For me to see where the compute lies, I'm going to click on that more services that we just clicked, and I'm just going to go back to our home page in case we missed that. And so I clicked on more services over here. This displays all the key categories in Azure Cloud for me to our left-hand area over here. And then you begin to see some of those key technologies we were talking about, such as storage that we just looked at a few seconds, if not a minute ago, and then compute that we just mentioned right here. Now, to quickly refresh our memory, if I come over here, you can see the compute, and when I come down here, I can see the access to that compute category. Now, I'm going to go ahead and select compute. And then you can see that once I select compute, I see all of the details and data in here. For example, some key items are virtual machine skill sets, availability sets, images, app services, as well as container apps and Kubernetes services. Now, do bear in mind that in the actual IT training, you're not going to be learning all of these things. What we do is for each category here, we focus on the items that are designed for the Azure Cloud Solution Architect. This is because the cloud does not just belong to the cloud architect, it also belongs to people in other certain roles in IT who are leveraging cloud technologies. So for example, anyone in the artificial intelligence and machine learning would have this space where they are learning from. People in the data analytics and or data analysts will be focusing on this area. And so you see that the cloud is a very vast and big environment with a lot of services, majority of them which are targeted towards the Azure Cloud Solution Architect. And that is exactly the structuring of IT training that SCASTAC brings to you in your full IT training, focusing on the specific parts for the Azure Cloud Solution Architect or the Azure Cloud Administrator. So sit back and relax. There's a lot to unbox and uncover here as we delve through all of these different areas. Now, coming back over here, we've looked at some of those skills that you're going to be measured with once you've completed your full IT training. You also have what we call the implement and manage virtual networking. Virtual networking is a key area of something we call network security within the Azure environment. And as you see, when we mentioned virtual networking there, you can see that the key areas where we need to focus highly on as virtual networks listed over there. And so you begin to see that the skills that are measured align and tally with the overview knowledge that the overview knowledge of what you're meant to grasp during the full IT training. As we delve into this free webinar, you're going to see us implementing a virtual network right in front of your very eyes. One of the other key and the last area here is being able to monitor as well as maintain Azure resources. Now, what exactly does this mean? This means that once we have our Azure services that we create and deploy and they become an Azure resource, we also have the opportunity to then monitor those resources as well as maintain them. And so when we see an item here, such as monitor and maintain, it typically falls under the category of governance. And while monitor itself has its own separate space, we can look at it from this perspective because the monitor part is a little bit more in percentage lower than the governance part. And that is why, without them having to cluster this space here with all of those technologies, they list the main key areas where other items can then fall under. To have a more greater understanding of this, you see the word here monitor, the word here governance. When we set into our Azure portal environment, we see the word there monitor, and we see the word there of management and governance. And so that is typically how the learning is structured in contrast to your certification. And so with that in mind, let us jump into our next step. Now, we saw that we had virtual networks listed over here. If I come back to our Azure portal, for me to easily find a virtual network, I can easily come over here and say virtual network, and I can find the virtual network over there. Another key area is to know exactly where each cloud service falls under. So we talked about our cloud service and then being able to create a cloud resource. And then we've also been talking about our cloud categories. Now, the virtual network is under what we call networking. So I'm going to go ahead and I've selected that. And you can see that the networking area is broken down into certain key areas. Over here, we have network foundations, hybrid connectivity, network security, as well as other key smaller areas. Now, the interesting thing about this is that under our network foundation, we have virtual networks, and we have other key security and network security services such as Bastion, DNS zones, private links, route tables, peerings, which is a very big deal. And we also have our local network gateways. We also have our firewalls, firewall manager, application gateways, and load balancers. So basically, in the full IT training, those are some of the key areas we'll be covering. We're not typically covering all of this because from a very fresh and new standpoint, that would be a lot for new candidates to grasp and learn. And also, all of these items listed over here, some of them are much more prevalent than others, which means on your day-to-day work as a cloud architect or a cloud engineer or a cloud administrator, you won't just be making use of this. So what we do is to cover the key services that you'll be needing in your professional job career, which are those ones that you just see me listed a few seconds ago. And so that is to just give you a quick background of what the Azure portal looks like. Now we're going to take a little bit of reverse and switch gears to actually jump into the Azure cloud from the very beginning. So to do that, I'm going to open up this documentation over here. I'm going to scoop over to the very first page. Then I'm going to expand this a little bit. Now, this is the beginning of a documentation that we use for students who are in the full IT training for the Azure Cloud Architect IT career. And so the very first thing we're going to do is to take a look at some of the tools that are utilized for the full training. Some of them involve the Azure portal, which we just saw a few seconds ago. And then we have some DevOps tools, because remember I told you a huge part of the cloud has DevOps embedded into it. And so we're going to see us using certain DevOps tools, such as our Git version control, Azure DevOps, Terraform, GitHub, Ansible, Docker, Kubernetes, and so on. And then we would use other tools to integrate properly with our Azure environment, such as our Azure Data Studio for managing our databases that are in the cloud, the Data Factory for managing data analytics that occur within the cloud environment, our Visual Studio Code for implementing certain DevOps implementations, such as infrastructure as a code, and then what we call our command line interface environments, which are used within the cloud to perform certain functions that look like scripts but have nothing to do with programming. So these are simple commands like saying, hey, I want to see the list of my cloud resources, or I want to create a new cloud resource. And we're going to see a little bit of example of what that looks like as well this evening. And so that pretty much covers the tools that are utilized for the full IT training. These tools then become the critical tools that you use in your IT career as a cloud solution architect. Now, what we are looking at over here is the full syllabus for a fully scheduled IT training with SCASTAC solution as an Azure cloud architect. Over here, we see the introduction to the cloud computing, Azure management and infrastructure, and then we see the compute that we talked about. And then you can see the key areas under the compute that we focus on. Going further from that, we look at infrastructure as code and DevOps to see the key areas we cover within those specific context area. And then we jump into monitoring, which we saw earlier as well, including storage that we saw, identity and access management, which falls under the usage of what we saw some few minutes back when we were talking about Microsoft Entra ID, and where we also discussed Azure RBAC, which is the Azure role-based access control used in controlling what users can do or limiting what users can do in the cloud. We also saw things like our governance, database analytics, as well as security and networking, where we saw our virtual networks. And so what we are looking at over here is a typical path for students once they join our IT training, or some parts are also constructed in case you are capable enough to do a self-learning by yourself by going online and looking for resources. A little bit difficult, but if you're very good in IT or you already have vast experience, you're already in another field that is close to the Azure cloud, it is actually possible for you to do a self-taught learning by yourself, gathering materials over here. However, if you're new to IT, you're not really working close to the cloud field, you definitely would need that full IT training from an instructor just like me to guide you professionally, answer the questions you might have, monitor the work you're doing, as well as just giving you all of the nitty-gritty of scopes you need to successfully complete your learning and IT training as an Azure cloud engineer. And so this IT training starts breaking things down from if you're pursuing a self-taught and instructor-led approach, which is what we are doing right now, being in an IT training where an instructor is leading you, or looking for some other online courses by yourself. So you have all of these three different parts. And then when you start up, say, for example, over here for the instructor-led, and you come down here, you see another part here where we start giving you details about your certifications and the right certifications for you to start from. We have our beginner, our associate, and the experts. The beginner is the easiest one. Our focus here is to bring you at the end of this training into becoming an expert in this area here, so that once you have attained your IT training and you've bagged your certification and you've gotten your job, then as you move on in your career, you can then go for the expert level. Most companies usually require at least this or this one over here. The associate is the most popular one, and it is what is structured around our IT training. So this means by the time you're done with our IT training, you'll be capable of passing both certifications over here. Do bear in mind for you to do the associate, which was the one we were looking at some few minutes back ago where we were breaking down all of the key areas, you would need to first take this exam. So by the way, these exams are very affordable. The beginner is about $99. The associate is about $165 or thereabout. But by the time you go through the IT training and you go through our materials for prepping for your practice test, you would see that you will pass this exam on the very first try. So that is part of why the IT training is very important. Now, as you start your instructor-led training, you would see that there are certain aspects of what we recommend you to start doing. Give me a second over there. And this means 79% into the training, we start helping you to build your resume and start having you looking at it in case you have any questions. So that means, boiling down into about 8 or 9 weeks into your IT training, we start releasing you with those resumes so that you can take a look at it, get comfortable with it, and so on. And then as you almost wrap up your IT training, remember we talked about the mock interview preparations where we theoretically and practically interview you to look like you're having a real interview with an interviewer, and then correct you on places where you might need improvement or where you might have missed one or two things. Typically, by the time students are done with our training, they ace the mock interviews very well. They get comfortable with what it looks like interviewing with recruiters, and they are ready to enter the battlefield to gain their new IT job as a cloud solution architect. And then 89% into the training as well too, we start giving you all of the details and nitty-gritty into knowing how to set up your job site profiles, how it should be structured, the kind of website you should take a look at, and what you should expect, the kind of details you should be showing, and the kind of details you should not be showing. And so with a combination of all of these three different layers and levels into the progress and completion of your IT training, you thereby finish that training, and by the time you are done, almost done with the IT training in your last week, you start actually seeing yourself receiving emails and phone calls from interviewers because we've been setting all your resume up, you've set up your job profile, we've done your mock interview for you right before you wrapped up. And so you see that everything comes into synchronization and you start seeing recruiters literally emailing you, literally calling you, and starting to have your interviews. And so with that in place, what would happen is, 3 weeks or 1 month into you completing your IT training, you start to see your job offers available. For some people, it might take a month and a half, it might take 2 months, because as we know, different people put in different energy and focus into their determination and their focus. But typically from what we've seen, in 3 weeks to 1 month, you start seeing job offers for your IT career. And so that's the breakdown of that. Definitely if you have questions, feel free to put it in the chat or feel free to unmute your mic to ask as well. So the next thing we're going to take a look at are some of the Azure certifications and job types. So let's first take a look at some of the different Azure job types. Now, remember we talked about Azure being a very vast field for other different types of IT folks. So over here, you're going to start seeing things like Azure developers. These are software or full stack developers who have certain services in the cloud that they are using. Now, this is not really our focus, but just wanted to let you know that those kind of people exist. Now, we see the Microsoft Azure Administrator, which is one of our key areas of focus. Now, it tells us the Microsoft job or Microsoft Azure Administrator job entails implementing, monitoring, if you remember those words we were seeing in our certificate over there, right? Plain and simple right there in your face. You can see the details there. Monitor and maintain those services. Let's track down where we are over here. And then also performing primary services related to what? Computing, storage, network, and security. Literally everything we just talked about right now and we saw in our Azure portal. And so one of the key titles for Microsoft Azure engineers is to either be a Microsoft Azure engineer, Microsoft Azure security engineer as an example again, Microsoft Azure cloud solution architect. And so we see we have at least 3 to 4 critical names. The Microsoft Azure administrator, the Azure cloud solution architect, the Azure cloud engineer, as well as our Microsoft Azure security engineer. So those 4 key job roles or titles are what we focus at ScarStack Solution to ensure that once you're done with your IT training, you are eligible for these 4 key job IT titles. And so we see other areas, other vast areas like Microsoft AI engineer. Remember when we're talking about the other folks who focus on artificial intelligence and machine learning, that would be their typical job title. And then we have the solutions architect that we talked about, right? This is the most prestigious job title or role. This and this almost mean the same thing, except that when you're an architect, you're meant to not just be a part of the team, but have a level of leadership role in deciding how your cloud environment should be architected. You know, what should it look like? What is the structure of creating the cloud solution and things like that? And our IT training covers that. In fact, the IT training targets this role specifically. So, which means that this role is a little bit higher than this role over here called the Microsoft Azure Administrator. It just covers way more deeper stuff, and our IT training covers it. And then from the full IT training, you can now decide if you feel comfortable with this role or if when you're applying to jobs, you want to take more leadership roles, more decision-making roles. And so it comes over here to tell us that the Azure Cloud Solution Architects offer solutions that run on Microsoft Azure. And they are the second most highly paid professional among all Azure jobs. So it tells us these solutions often translate into what? Creating, gathering requirements, determining a suitable infrastructure. So you see that? Making the key decisions in the cloud. Hey, this is the one we should use. This is the one that cost the most, that's going to save us the most cost. This is the best way to structure our components together. This component should be created before that component. Key concepts like that. And so that's why we see things like also designing and configuring applications. So it tells us that Azure Cloud Solution Architect need to be proficient in computing, networking, and security. And as you see that detail right there, you can see it staring us there in our face. Compute, security, networking. And so that is part of what the Azure Cloud Solution Training from ScarStack ensures it covers properly alongside all other trainings. And if we go back over here to our full guide here, you can see the security being here, you can see the networking here, and you can see the compute over here. As a matter of fact, because the Azure Cloud Solution Architect is the most prestigious and high level, that is why you see these numbers being structured this way, and you see the security and networking being the last 2 items. So that by the time you go through all of this, you'll pretty much be covering some key areas of security and networking. And by the time we get to item number 10 in the full training syllabus, you get a very detailed and deep knowledge of how security and networking works. 60% of what you're going to be seeing, you would have understood it already, because the concept of security and networking, you would come across it creating majority of these cloud resources during our IT training. And so with that in mind, let us look at what exactly the cloud is. Now we're going to jump into this part here that talks about introduction to cloud computing, and we can see different key areas here, such as what is, introduction to cloud computing, the cloud services and models, and then some of the benefits. So let's jump right into it. Meanwhile, don't forget, if you have any questions, definitely feel free to unmute your mic. Now, the beginning of the course starts with the definition and introduction to cloud computing, where students have a very easy understanding of what the cloud is versus what cloud computing is. And make no mistakes, they are very interrelated. Here we are being told that the cloud is an extensive network of remote servers around the world, which is very, very true. So whenever we are accessing a lot of materials where we're having to use the internet, such as accessing our web emails, streaming our videos on Netflix, and using office productivity software like the Microsoft 365, we are already interacting with the cloud. And so with that in mind, what then is cloud computing? Well, with that knowledge we've gained from the definition of the cloud computing now has to do with the delivery of computing services. Now, I want us to take a very deep pause over there. The delivery of computing services. So that means all of those services you're enjoying in the cloud, including the ones that are not listed here, the process of bringing them together for you to leverage them in the cloud is the main purpose of cloud computing, which is delivering different types of cloud services. Remember, I talked about cloud services and cloud resources, delivering them to the cloud. And so when we talk about those delivery of those computing services, we start to see some of those examples we've mentioned earlier. We see things like networking that we mentioned. We saw our analytics. We saw our storage, our databases, and our servers, which is the same thing as the compute, where we deploy things like our virtual machines. And so that definition tells us that to achieve what users can use in the cloud, we need services like cloud computing that involves different types of services that we've seen also within the portal to deliver these services over the internet or cloud for more faster and better innovation, as well as even more flexible resources. Now, the good thing about the cloud is that it helps companies save a whole lot of money. And so you have a lot of companies that basically were having some of their structures within their own office environments, and then they now decided to take those IT infrastructures or applications to the cloud to offer more security, to offer more costs, right? Cost savings. So when you move those items into the cloud, you get to save a whole lot more money. And so there are much more vast examples, and we're going to see a few of them as we cut through these different slides. Now, let's move to the next item. So over here, it talks about how cloud revolutionized, right? From back in the days, what led to the cloud existing today started from back in the 60s, where we had what we call mainframe computing, which had a centralized processing system for mass storage of, data and other informations like that. And then from there, gradually, as time moved on, the world moved into what we call the SMP open systems for what we call multiple processors. This is where you have like many pools of processors working interdependently to help companies manage different administration software. And so that timeline goes on up until when it gets to what we call grid computing. And the grid computing is very similar to our cloud computing. As a matter of fact, the cloud computing came out specifically from the concept of this grid computing. Over here, the concept was to use what we call harnessing distributed resources to offer big companies all across the world large-scale accomplishment of their business solution tasks. And so with all of this technology together, they started to become a build-up of an integrational computing system and a way to sort of revolutionize the delivery of computing services to be in the cloud instead of being into what we call on-premises. The on-premises itself used to be how majority of all of this used to operate. And what does that mean? A company being solely responsible for their own technology, their own infrastructure, their own distributed computing. When it came to the cloud, they now realized that they could actually, instead of building a huge data center by themselves, they could leave all of that responsibility to a cloud service provider such as Microsoft Azure, Google Cloud Platform, AWS. And then companies could have all of their infrastructures in that cloud without having to build those clouds directly by themselves. And as we move on to the next few slides, you're going to gain more deeper understanding on what that is. And so let's jump into the next thing. So remember a few seconds ago, we talked about on-premises, right? The companies, when they were still working with the distributed cloud computing, they were all of these technologies, they were working on premises. So this means if I want to have 10 computers in my house for 10 different reasons, I'm responsible for buying those computers, plugging them together, making sure they are powerful enough to manage my business purposes, and I am just fully responsible for that. In the cloud, I don't have to have those 10 computers. I can just reach out to Microsoft, click a few buttons, and create those 10 computers without actually having or owning, or rather having them with me physically. And so companies started to move from on-premises, right? They started to see a lot of complexity in on-premises infrastructure, and they started to see a lot of benefits in the cloud. What does this mean? This basically means when we're talking about companies, we're talking about companies that have thousands of IT infrastructures, such as servers, databases, applications, and so on and so forth, including their networking, right? The way they network these different servers together. So the difference between the on-premises and cloud is the on-premises is where companies are still being responsible for all of their IT infrastructures physically, versus the cloud, where everything is now automated, everything is now managed by a different cloud service provider, and you just access these resources over the internet. And that is the big difference between on-premises versus cloud. Now we're going to skip multi-cloud computing and a few things over here. One area I wanted us to look at is the different types of cloud computing services. The very first one we're going to start with is infrastructure as a service. Now, to get to understand how the different cloud computing services are broken down into key major categories, that is done in three different areas or phases. One of them is the infrastructure as a service. The other one is the platform as a service. And the third one is the software as a service. So now remember when we started the introduction to cloud computing, we talked about the definition of the cloud. You being able to use things like your webmail, streaming, streaming videos online, like using Netflix, using things like Dropbox or Google Docs to synchronize between what you have on your physical computer and putting those items in the cloud. That part here is the software as a service. Now, before the software as a service comes to life, it typically has to go through a process, right? After all, if you take a plate or a bowl, the bowl doesn't just come from somewhere, right? It doesn't just drop from the heavens. The bowl actually has to be created in a warehouse or a manufacturing company. That process of that bowl being created is what we are seeing over here for the infrastructure as a service, as well as the platform as a service. And so these two bedrocks form the foundation for being able to deliver a software as a service to customer clients as a solution, service, or methodology to solve any form of problem. And so with that in mind, we see that the infrastructure as a service are those services in our cloud environment that we talked about, such as our servers, our virtual machines that we looked at, our virtual networks, right? Our storage, our network, our security, all of those things, they are grouped under the infrastructure as a service. The next is the platform as a service. This specifically has to do with web applications and just basically anything that is anything coming out from a web server or an application server. It could be a web application, it could be a web app, it could be a website, it could be what we call a web API as well, including other technologies, newer technologies like microservices and and serverless computing, basically. And so we have that division of infrastructure and application to form the full service. And that is why we see that breakdown of the infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service. Now, to quickly give you a little bit of insight whilst we're doing that, I'm going to jump back. Remember the word, right? Infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, PaaS. Now, when we go into our Azure portal back, when I look at my compute over here, immediately what I'm provided with is that under the compute, they are breaking down services for us over here, letting us know that amongst the list of all what we are seeing over here, the items that are infrastructure as a service are listed here. And so we can see things like our virtual machines, availability set, and the rest. They now then show us the app service. We see other examples like Azure Spring Services, and this falls under the platform as a service. And then you can see all those other new technologies I talked about, such as serverless and microservices, which are closely related to platform as a service because there are more modern and newer ways of managing applications for what we call orchestration as well as containerization. They are put into these newer categories. As you can see over here, if I click on the containers, I get information much more robust about all of our container services within the Azure environment. And so that is typically what the breakdown looks like. And so with that in mind, let's take a pause here from our slide. Remember, if you have any questions, definitely feel free to ask any questions. Now, the next thing we want to take a look at over here are some of the different types of Azure job positions out there. Now I'm going to go ahead and close this. And then I'm going to jump into this next slide here. Over here, we're looking at dice.com, right? And you can see we have a vast array of jobs within the Azure cloud environment. One of it, for example, we could take a look at, let's scroll down a little bit. We can start seeing some of our Azure jobs, even this as well too. So we start to see those job titles and we start to see them playing out right over here. We see the Azure Cloud Engineer. We see the Azure Cloud Architect. Let's take a look at both of this. Now, when we take a look at the Azure Cloud Engineer over here, we can see some of the prices over here for this. This is a per hour job. I think you can also have it as a full-time, so it's sort of like a per hour. For full-time, you can see they earn extensively good salary right over there. And then you can see some of the skills that are over here, right? You can see the data bricks. If I go over here to this diagram, you're going to see our data bricks being listed over there. Now let's switch back over here as well too. These are key knowledge and information. And then as we go down here, let's see, I think we might have missed that. So let's click on the full job. And so as we look at this, you can see details right over here. And you begin to see the manifestation of the IT training in correlation with this job postings. You can see DevOps, SQL, Data Factory. You come over here, you can see your DevOps, of course. You can see your Data Factory. You can see your SQL as well too. So that goes to show you that what you're learning is practically being what is released to you over here. You can see some of the things we talked about, the CI/CD processes within DevOps, where we use things like our Azure DevOps as well as our GitHub and Git version control to achieve that, including with the Azure cloud environment. You can see those tools right there, right in front of us there, the Azure DevOps. We see the Azure DevOps right there. But we'll take a look at, again, we see all those things we talked about, the SQL database. We're going to actually create a SQL database this evening. You're going to see exactly what a SQL database looks like. In fact, please show you the SQL database. You're going to see one here. You can see it directly over here, SQL database. When you click on it, this is what the SQL database looks like, right? So pretty much everything you're seeing in any resume, you get to see that you've experienced it in your IT training. And that is why I said, when you do the training, you get given the resume, you're going to just see, every recruiter sees your information. And then again, remember, this is just one job posting, right? And in any job posting I open, I would always see anything in there and I'll see it in the IT training to see that it is actually covered. So we see all of those details like that. Let us take a look at other ones because we still want to cover some few practical sessions over here. So when I take a look at this one, for example, let's click a little bit. So this does not really provide too much detail, it seems. So let's go ahead and close that. Let's try to look at another one. Let's take a look at this. Okay, so this provides some few key informations. So we can see our Azure AKS, which is our Azure Kubernetes services that we mentioned. That is the Azure Kubernetes services right there. If I go or come over here as well too, we can see our Kubernetes listed over there. When I jump back into that thing, we can see our networking we talked about. We can see our storage. We can see even our firewall, right? We see our compute. We see the platform as a service we just mentioned. We saw the firewall that we mentioned earlier on, right? Fully present inside this. This is a big document. This is a 380 page documentation for the students that are given to the students. And if I go over to our portal over here and I click this and I go to our networking, remember, right? We talked about security and networking. When I click our networking, I can see my firewall right there, which we also cover, which means if I go on this page and I click find and I type in firewall to say find firewall, I'm going to start seeing all of the details. I see it over here. Let's take a look at another one. I see firewall covered over here. And as you can see, those pages are moving, right? We can see the firewall, 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 and we see it over there. Now, when we now jump into networking, we now see where we lay focus specifically on firewall. And so that's just to show you how when you take a look at all of the resumes, no matter what, you're going to see that the IT training, the full IT training covers literally everything that you'd see coming up on any resume. And that's why we say when you do everything properly and you sign up in less than a month, you're going to start seeing your job offers. Because when the recruiters see your resume, it's going to look very impressive. Everything, any type of recruiter from any company is looking for, they are going to be able to see it in your resume. So all of these items over here, every one of them are inside our part of our learning and IT training. So with that in mind, I just wanted to just show you a little bit of that, so that you see everything, because part of the motto for this free webinar is for you to know everything that encompasses becoming an Azure cloud expert. And so with that in mind, let's take a quick look at the original website, right? So my original website, when you go over there and you go to the IT trainings, you're going to see other IT trainings we do, such as our cybersecurity. You're going to see the details over there for the cybersecurity, very, very fantastic field as well too. Then you see our cloud solution engineer. Today we are looking at Azure. We also cover the AWS. Based on current trends in the market, I always tell people, if you want to go for the cloud, definitely go for Azure. But if you want to gain a combination of both, you can see we have the breakdown of that information over here. The AWS, either if you want to go for AWS or Azure, either one of them is 1,200. If you want a combination of both, well, we give you 100% on one of them and then 50% on the other one, which means the learning curve, right? The depth of the learning, because it is technically hard to give you 100% of both of them. Simply because that would be more expensive, number one. Number two, it would be a whole lot of information for you to assimilate. So we try to make this smart so that you're benefiting, because our goal here is to make sure you land a very fantastic six-figure jobs immediately in like a month, after your IT training. You can see the training duration is 12 weeks. The delivery is over Zoom. Over here, you can even see what people are earning, right? What does an Azure cloud or cloud solution architect earn? You click on the Glassdoor salary, and it shows you right there. You can see that amount, 144,000. So when I say six figures, it's deep into six figures. There's no less paying job or anything like that within the cloud solution. It's easy to learn. It pays six figures and very high capacity, and it is easy to learn. It has no programming involved in it. So that's how you sort of navigate the ScarStack Solution website. Again, the website is www.scarstacksolution.com. Other things to see over here are things like our tools utilized during the training, which we saw in the guide. We also saw the certifications that we can earn through that, and that is our Microsoft Azure. Now, the AWS is over here as well too, in case you are going for the AWS track IT training with us. And so you can see that even the syllabuses are provided for us over here. So you get to know before you go into this full IT training what exactly you will be learning and going through. When we click on that, we're going to see some of those details, right? We are pretty much seeing a little bit of part of the PDF documentation that we're just going through, and you can see the breakdown of all of those in there, So that's pretty much those details that are there to help you understand exactly what you're going to be learning with ScarStack Solution. So now, with that in mind, into some practical exercise to see exactly how we deploy and create some of these cloud resources. So before we do that, just give me about 30 seconds and then we'll be back to delve on this. Okay, welcome back. So now we are ready to start tackling some cloud resource deployment and provisioning. Now, as we go through this task, you're basically going to be seeing me mentioning words like configuring, provisioning, deploying, creating, and managing, right? What does all of this terminology mean? Well, let's first talk about the most crucial one. The most crucial one is provisioning. Provisioning is the process of putting together all of the requirements and details that are needed to create a cloud resource using the cloud services. So if you're in a car factory, for example, and you took all of the parts of a vehicle and you are putting all of them together as an example, that would be called provisioning. Now, when the car is now fully assembled and you now release them from the warehouse to, say, for example, a car sales dealership spot, you understand? That process is called deploying. You are now letting that go out after it has been assembled. And so in the car or manufacturing industry, where we use words like manufacturing and releasing, in the cloud, we say provisioning and deploying. Provisioning, putting the materials together for the service you want to create, and then deploying, clicking the button that actually goes ahead to go and create those resources. So one of the key items I wanted us to first take a look at is resource groups. Resource groups are very important in the cloud because our resource groups actually serve as cloud logical containers for grouping together different resources we create in the cloud. Without resource groups, if we create every resource in the cloud, it is more like coming to a home that has no shelf or cabinet, right? Everything is all scattered on the floor or on a particular table. And we definitely do not want that in the cloud. And so we utilize what we call resource groups to sort of group different cloud resources that might have one or two similarities together. And so one example over here, we can see that we have different types of resources over here. So as we're looking at this screen, we see our Azure services that lets us know that some of the things that are listed here are our recently used services that can be used to do what? Create resources like this. Hence why you see this is saying Azure services and why I can see more services, but also why my resources are also listed here. So these are just a few of the most recent resources I've created over here. And so that is pretty much what the structure looks like. Now, I'm going to switch over to another portal over here. And over here, we're going to go back to our own page and I see something quite similar. Over here, let's take a look at one resource group. Now, because I can create a new services from over here, I can easily start creating a new resource group, which I'm going to do in a second. But if I want to go and take a look at where my resource group is as a service, I can click the more services. I can click management and governance. And then under management and governance, I can click my service here that is called resource group. Now, once I click it, I can see the list of resource groups I have. This lets me know I have 4 resource groups available right now. And so I'm going to click on one of them, which is this right over here. And within this resource group, I can see different resources. So I want you to picture and imagine this as a pictures folders where you have your images, right? We all use computers. We have a structure that might be similar to what we are looking at over here. So assuming this resource group, which technically is a folder, right, has this word here, which is very long, but let's say this is called pictures. So you have a folder, which is a resource group that is named this, e.g. pictures. And then inside that folder, when you double click inside that folder, what are you expected to see? Should you have a few pictures? You see your files. You can arrange them as icons. You can arrange them as lists. And that is what you're seeing over here. This tells us that this resource group, titled as this, has this amount of resources. These resources were created using a service, right? The cloud services was able to create these resources, and they are all created under this. Well, how do they fall under this specific resource group? Why aren't they in another resource group? It's because when we were creating these resources, we positioned them to be under this specific resource group. And so let's go and take a look at an example where we're going to create a virtual machine, right? We've been talking about virtual machines. We've seen it in all of these job resumes. We've seen it on the Azure training certification website under compute. So let's go and take a look and see what that does. Typically, the virtual machine is a computer, but it's not just a computer, it is a supercomputer, which means it's not just your regular Windows machine. It is a more powerful Windows machine. So think about it in a case example like Tesla. You have your smaller Tesla cars, your S model, T model, and the rest. And then you have your Cybertruck, which can also take you to your destination. However, when you look at the build of the Cybertruck, it is more stronger than just the regular cars. And that is the difference between a computer server and a computer machine. The computer servers, which are also called virtual machines in Microsoft Azure, are meant to be computers, such as your Windows machine or a Linux machine, but they are meant to come with more stronger capacity so that they can handle much more business professional tasks that organizations and Fortune 500 companies around the world require them to do. So let's go and take an example and see how that is built. So I'm going to go back to my home page. And over here at the home page, since we want to create a virtual machine, I'm going to go to our more services. And from our more services over here, we know that our virtual machine falls under what? Under compute. So I'm going to select compute there, and I can see our virtual machine. So I'm going to go ahead and select that virtual machine. Now that I have this virtual machine selected, I can see that we have one virtual machine existing. So let's go and take a sneak peek on it and see what is exactly going on over there. So I'm going to click it. And now that I've clicked it, imagine we're looking at a computer right now, right? This is a computer we're taking a look at right now. However, the computer basically is a reflection of how we are accessing it online, right? So we see some certain key information. Remember how we were talking about virtual networks? We've seen it being displayed to us. Azure lets us know it's very, very essential and important. They also have it on their certification website there to let you know that one of the key things is the very first thing listed there, virtual networks. Now, over here, we see that this virtual machine, which is also called a supercomputer, is attached to a virtual network. And that virtual network, underneath it has a child item here that is called a subnet. And so when I click on that virtual network, I'm no longer looking at the virtual machine. I'm now taking a look at the virtual network. I'm seeing some of the key details about it, such as its DNS servers, its address space, the ID of the virtual network. When I drop down this configuration, I can start seeing other key things about it. Now, before we click this virtual network, it told us there was a virtual network / subnet, and today we're not going to go into the architectural meaning of all of that. But you can see over here, if I go to the subnet, this virtual network has one subnet associated with it that has an IP address. So now I'm going to navigate back to our virtual machine. And what exactly I'm going to do that? I'm going to use what we call a navigational mapping over here to make my way back, which means I don't have to be clicking back, you know, like we're back in the 1960s, right? I can jump into any specific angle that I want. I can click over here, which will show me the list of total virtual machines. But I can jump in here to signify I want to go to a specific virtual machine that we're coming from. So it's just walking our way backwards. So if we click this as an example, we'll see right here, I'm clicking this, but you can see we're still here. because this is a virtual network. This is the virtual network part. But remember, we were in the virtual machine before we jumped to the virtual network. So this is still telling me, hey, you are still here. So I'm going to click on this one here, which will take us to the virtual machine. And so we see now we are back in our virtual machine. So we just wanted to take a quick look at this. Now we're going to create another virtual machine, and we're going to see how this works. For me to do that, I'm going to quickly seize the opportunity of taking ownership of this name over here. I'm going to come back to this. I'm going to go back to our more services. Make sure we select compute. We select our virtual machines. Then I'm going to hit the create button over here. Perfect. So now that we've selected our service, which is the virtual machine, right? Remember in the beginning, we talked about services and resources. So we've selected our services, and now we are trying to create a resource out of that service. And so one of the very first thing I'm going to do is to do what? Is to select a resource group. Remember the folder where you put the specific item you're trying to work on. So over here, I'm going to go ahead and select a specific resource group. We want to put this under this resource group over here, titled Health Insurance Resource, REG UAT01. Next, we want to go with a name for our computer. Now, I've copied the name of an existing virtual machine, and I'm going to paste it over here. You're going to see it's going to immediately tell me that this already exists, right? So it tells me the virtual machine names must be unique. So to do this, I'm going to simply come over here and put in a sequential number 2. By the way, there are different ways to name your cloud resource. This is just one example. Over here, this means that the word VM is an abbreviation for virtual machine. MKT is marketing department. The DP stands for the department. The West means that because we are working in the cloud itself means that Azure has data centers all across the world in specific areas. For this, we've chosen the US West too. And so we are also signifying in the name so that when anybody looks at the name of this, they have a lot of information about what is going on here. First, they know this is a virtual machine. They know it's for the marketing department of that organization. They know that it is deployed to the Western region. So if they have any issues, they know they're dealing with the Western region of Azure's cloud data center. This word right here signifies exactly what this virtual machine's business purpose is. So in this case, as an example, this virtual machine is meant to handle tasks and details that are geared towards a project that is for their health insurance registration. So we're given an example that this is perhaps like an health company that issues health insurance services to companies all across the world. The UAT signifies an environment. Now, in the IT tech world and just the business world generally, we have what we call environments. These environments ensure that when we work on delivering solutions to the customer, we pass through a certain phase or step to make that product a reality. Take, for example, Facebook is creating a new application. Let's say when they were creating a new application such as Instagram, even though they didn't really create Instagram, they own and acquired it. But let's say an application like that. They don't just go and just create something and release it. They create the application, they put it into an environment that is private to specific people in the organization so that those people can test that product to see if it is working as it is. Are users able to create a profile? Are users able to put in certain details into their profile? Can users see other people's profiles? Can users send friend requests? They perform all of these tests. That environment is typically called the dev environment or the development environment, shortened for dev, which is DEV. Now, if everything works well in that environment, they're like, this has been tested. Now we want to give it to specific users, either within the company or partners of the company or a few selected outsiders. Typically, the UAT environment is still not public, so it is done in a controlled environment. And so they move that product to the UAT environment, which is called user acceptance testing, where people other than the developers start to test that product or service. When they're in the environment, they give users access to that product or service to test. If the users come back with some errors, the users report those errors, developers go back, they fix all of that, they release it back again from dev to the UAT environment. The testers receive it again. They start to do their test. Now, this time around, if everything is okay, the testers say, good, the application is working great. We believe it's ready for release to the world. Then it goes to the last level environment called the prod environment. This environment is the final release of that product, application, software, or service to the public at large. And Facebook, for example, if they wanted to add a new feature, they will go through this sort of similar process. They have a copy of their code. They start from the dev. They move to the test environment before releasing it to the prod, which is the production environment. That is the final environment for the customers to receive that information. So in this case, we're acting like this virtual machine is for the what? The UAT environment. Hence why we have that word UAT over there. As far as the cloud is concerned, we want this to be released in the western region of Azure's cloud data centers. So I'm going to select that. Now we're going to leave a few things here, pretty basic and simple, just because we don't have that much time, and just the complexity of explaining it is meant for a full practical IT training class. Now, one of the things we want to focus on is the image to use. I'm creating a computer, a supercomputer, I know that, but what type of operating system am I working with? The operating system is represented by an image. Am I creating a Windows computer, a Linux computer, stuff like that? Now I can look from the list and I can see a few Linux computers such as the Ubuntu, Red Hat, and the rest, but I want to go for a Windows computer. Remember, if you are trying to go to Best Buy and you're trying to buy a computer, you'll probably go in and say, I need a Windows computer. But because we've talked about virtual machines being supercomputers, they're not called Windows computers, they're called Windows Server. This is because they have server capability as well that can enable that computer to serve as an application or web server where you can then deploy applications to the world, such as Facebook.com, Instagram.com, and the rest. And that begins to show you the key importance of supercomputers in the cloud for business companies. So in this case, we're going to select the Windows Server. And then now, when you're buying a computer, you need to know what's the random access memory, what's the size, right? All of this concept. The size here handles that. I can tell it I want a 1 gig RAM memory, or I can say, I don't like that, that's too small, I want a 3.5 gig RAM memory, which is the random access memory. So I'm going to select that. You can see the prices show there. So when I select that, I'm going to come in over here, and then I need to be able to log in, especially as an admin, into this supercomputer. So I'm going to go in and put that in. I'm going to go in and put in the password. Repeat that. And then over here, I'm going to select what we call an inbound port. What this means is if I want to access my computer remotely, right, I need some level or leverage of access and I need to configure that and explicitly state that. So I'm going to go over here and say, yes, select that for me. There's also another feature when we talked about this computer being a server and people being able to deploy applications through this particular virtual machine. Things like the HTTP and HTTPS enables access to that possibility. For now, I'm just going to select HTTP. So now I'm going to click next. Over here, when you're buying a computer, again, we talked about the storage, right? When you buy your iPhone, you need to know what's the capacity of the storage on the iPhone. Is it 64 gig? Is it 48 gig? If you're someone that likes taking a lot of pictures and someone says, yes, a 32 gig iPhone or a 64 gig, you might say, no, I don't like that. That's a little bit of a small storage. I need something bigger. I need 127 or 250. this is where you go about doing that. So I can go over here and select 256 gig. And then the next thing, I can skip some of this over here. If I wanted to attach an extra disk, I can do that. But I'm going to go to next. So you remember when we were talking about security and networking? I said, even before getting to that topic in our, the full agenda of our syllabus, you would often come across those concepts during the IT training, right? So even before we get into networking, we'll start to see them as we provision and deploy services. And that is exactly what is going on over here. We see that we have a networking space where we can now choose our new virtual network, right? We can either have it create one for us automatically, or we can create a new one. We're going to say, instead of creating a new one, we're just going to we're going to be comfortable with the virtual network that's been created here for us. So we're going to leave that way. I'm going to say the subnet that is associated to the virtual network can be left in this way as well. Bear in mind, if we're doing the full IT training, this will not go this direct. We'll break down everything for you to know exactly what the subnet is, the virtual network, how to configure it, how to relate with public IP addresses or private IP addresses, how to set up your network security group. As a matter of fact, we technically would create this individually as its own. And then once it's created, when we are creating our virtual machine, we'll come down here to select it as an option. But since it's a simple, direct, straightforward free webinar, we're just going to go through with this particular pace. So for now, everything looks good over here. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say review this and then prep for creating. So this process right here of us going through these individual tabs is what is called provisioning, right? We are provisioning our cloud resource to give it all of the configuration we need to utilize this new virtual machine. And once the provisioning state has now been done and you are validated that everything looks well, you can now deploy this. And so that's why I told you you're going to see not using words like administer, manage, provision, provisioning state, deploying, deployment stage, things like that. And so with that in mind, I'm going to hit the create button to start deploying this virtual machine. So you can see it taking its time, setting itself up, and very shortly it will start the deployment process. And so right now we can see it's telling us the deployment is in progress. Remember, literally 96% of any cloud resource you're going to create in the cloud will have to fall under a resource group. It just can't be laying on the floor, anywhere. So majority of the cloud services you're going to create would need to be associated with a resource group, especially the key cloud services. And so we know that we selected during the provisioning state for this virtual machine, we selected this resource group. So we're expecting to see it come up under this resource group once it has been successfully created. And so while we wait for that deployment to complete, you can see that when it's creating, it's telling us the exact type of things it is creating. It is telling us, okay, for this particular deployment, I'm creating a virtual machine, and that is the primary item, right? So let's click on that again. The deployment has been successfully completed. You can see that. So when I look at that deployment details, I can see the virtual machine itself. And then because that virtual machine needed other cloud services, it went to go ahead and create a network interface, created a network security group, and a public IP address. So with that in mind, let us go and take a look at the resource. We can go through different ways to go and take a look at that. We can either go to resource, we can click the resource group where these items are placed under to take a look at it. So let's go through that route. So I want to click this. And so I can see that this was the resource group we were looking at earlier. Now the list is longer, right? Because now we have some new cloud resources we've just successfully deployed and created. So with that in mind, let us look for our virtual machines. Now, if I wanted to do this, I can even just filter this and just say virtual machine. And we are presented with the virtual machine we created, which is this new one. This was the old one we met. So let's go ahead and click on that. Now that we have that clicked, I can decide I want to connect to this virtual machine remotely, right? We are seeing all of the other attributes, such as the virtual network, the public IP address. We can see that the operating system is the Windows operating system as well. And just a host of all other details about this virtual machine. So the next, I'm going to go to connect. And then from here, I'm going to click on check access to see if we have access currently to access this virtual machine. So let's click on that and give it a few seconds. And it tells us it is accessible. And so with that, I'm going to do a download RDP file here for us to remotely connect into this virtual machine. So I'm going to click download RDP file. And it's going to download the file for me. So let me switch over here. I can see that file right here. So I'm going to double click on that file. And while that is waiting up, we're going to come back to our page here. We can see it's trying to load up there. Wonderful. So now that it's loaded this up for us, remember, initially it presented us when we were provisioning this virtual machine to provide a username and password. So I'm going to provide that password over here, and we're going to log in right now. I'm going to hit continue. It's going to ask for me to validate the certification for it. I'm going to say yes. And so remember I told you when we're creating this, we're creating a computer. And right now we see ourselves logging into that computer. And if you were to be doing this the old school way, you'd have to buy the computer, you'd have to place it down in the data center physically, you have to have engineers put together the machine, have it start up, and deal with all of those physical infrastructure. Whereas in the cloud, it's just a matter of clicking buttons to create your cloud solution, and then now you can access it. The only difference here is I did not need to place an order. I did not need to pay any taxing fee, shipping fee. I don't need to have a physical computer data center as far as my company is concerned to put all of these computers. And I can create a computer in less than 1 minute and start using it. And that is what we just did right now. And these are the things that can never be achieved if you add your physical infrastructure and you're still trying to do this on an on-premise way, right? You have to set up all of these things physically. And then talking about managing it, right? When the company, you have a big data center, you're responsible for managing your data center, either for building it, renting it, hiring the manpower, hiring the network engineers to put together all of the servers and make them work interconnectively. You are going to be responsible for getting rid of that computer. So if you've bought 100 computers and you want to get rid of them, then it's your responsibility to either give that out or start trying to resell those computers. In the cloud, you don't resell any computer. If you don't need it, you click a delete button and it goes away. No questions asked from Azure at all. And that shows us just with that one example, the gravity and intensity of how important the cloud is and why all of the companies in the world are moving to the cloud, which in that excess navigates towards the cloud engineer being a very vital role and an important career role, highly payable role, and a role that is here to stay. It is the future. It's like thinking of Netflix and the other streaming platforms. Nobody's going back to blockbusters. Nobody's going back to go rent DVDs. The future, in that case or that scenario, is digital streaming, and that is similarly the case for the cloud. And just this is just one simple example from the cloud perspective. And so with that in mind, we see that we are now within our Windows environment. I want to reduce this a little bit. I can stretch it out a bit. And we can see we are basically in a Windows computer environment. I can go ahead to go launch Microsoft Edge. And so companies, when they create these super machines, right, they can then use the super machines to manage their databases. They can deploy web application on this, machine. They can install all sorts of applications that they need for their business continuity and their business daily need activities. And so that is how you go about creating a supercomputer, also called a virtual machine, in an Azure environment. And as you can see, we are making use of that right now. If I went to scarstarksolution.com, I'll be able to reach that from inside the virtual machine. And so with that in mind, you get to see exactly how virtual machines are deployed. So let me go ahead and close this right here and then close this virtual machine. Yeah, and so that's how we go about creating all of these different services. And that is just one example, right? We also saw the example of the database, which I showed us earlier on. If we click over to our home page, I can go to SQL databases and I'll see a database that was created for us. In this database, if, for example, I wanted to access this database, I can click on something that is called the query editor over here. And then I can log into this database and I can say, put in the password for this. And then it takes its time and then it logs me in. And just like that, I'm inside this database. From here, I can now take a look at some of the tables I have. I can look at the product model table. I can say, select the top 1,000 rows, which is an SQL statement, right? And so I can see the SQL statement, select 1,000, top first 1,000 rows from a table called sales.lt.product model, and I can see all of the details inside that table. And that is a database being accessed from what? From the cloud. And this database itself is part of a SQL server. So if I stretch this out, I can see the SQL server that this database is connected to. And so this marks the end of our practical session on working with Azure Cloud from a practical hands-on perspective. And so if you're definitely interested in a full IT training, as you can see, all the items we worked on, pretty simple to create, simple to access and navigate through. And that is literally the experience, the whole experience that you get to see when you are working as an Azure Cloud Solution Architect, especially when you join our Practical IT full training. And so if you want to reach out, you can easily send us an email if you're interested in the full IT training. I know 2 people already sent me an email. They're interested in the next cohort that is starting off in November 18. We also have about 7 more people, so that's like 9 more people, and that is just for the Azure Cloud. It is our most popular class, so you're going to see us hosting a lot of free webinars here because the opportunities in Azure Cloud, the potential to landing a job is so fascinating, it's so easy, it's so straightforward, especially once you do your parts, you do the learning, we give you the practical labs, and you follow your resume, and you set up the job portal the way we instruct you at the end of your full training. Landing the job is very, very easy. And with that, we're going to wrap it up here from the video recording perspective so that we can answer questions, if anyone has that offline.